She was supposed to be invisible. That was the entire point of hiring a temp. Senna Dupree understood this better than most, had understood it since she was 22, and learned that being a plus-size woman in a male-dominated field meant either making yourself very small or being very, very good. She had chosen the latter. But tonight, in the steel and glass tower that housed Kazarian Holdings on the 43rd floor of a midtown Manhattan skyscraper, invisible was the one thing she could no longer afford to be. She had taken the contract because it paid triple her usual rate. 6 days, full access to the shipping logs and accounts payable ledgers, a mandate to find the source of a recurring $40,000 discrepancy that kept ghosting through the quarterly books. Her firm had been hired as a third-party auditor, arm's length, no conflict of interest, no long-term engagement. She was the cleanup crew, the help. Senna knew exactly what she looked like to the people who passed her workstation in the open-plan bullpen outside the executive suite, a woman pushing 30, with wide hips and a full soft belly and thick arms that her cream-colored blouse could only do so much for. She had a PhD in forensic accounting and a mind that could smell fraud the way other people smelled smoke. But none of that showed from the outside. What showed was a plus-size black woman in a consignment-shop blazer, eating a sad desk sandwich and staring at shipping manifests. So she stayed quiet. She kept her head down. She was meticulous and she was invisible, and she had almost made it. Lev Kazarian ran his empire the way most men played chess, 3 moves ahead, utterly calm, with the patience of someone who had never once doubted that he would win. He had built Kazarian Holdings from a single shipping container lease on the Brooklyn waterfront into a multinational logistics firm moving product across 4 continents. What the firm's annual report did not disclose was the second set of books, the ones that tracked considerably more profitable cargo passing through the same ports, invisible to customs and auditors alike. He was 41 years old. He had heavy-lidded dark eyes the color of strong tea, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something unyielding, and the kind of stillness that made people nervous even when he smiled. He never raised his voice. He had never needed to. On the 5th day of the audit, Lev held a closed-door meeting in the conference room adjacent to the executive bullpen. The glass walls were frosted to the shoulder height of a standing man, which meant anyone seated at a workstation outside could not see in. What the architects had not accounted for was acoustics. The sound-dampening panels had been installed by a contractor who had since been replaced, and at a certain frequency, specifically the low, resonant baritone of a man speaking in rapid, guttural Armenian, the words carried through the ductwork into the bullpen with remarkable clarity. Senna had been staring at a discrepancy in a Rotterdam container log for 40 minutes when she heard it. Her pencil went still. The voice was Lev's. She recognized it from the 2 brief interactions she'd had with him during the week, a nod when she'd arrived, a single question about timeline on day 3. His English was unaccented, polished, almost aggressively American. But the voice coming through the ceiling ductwork was speaking something older, something that belonged to the back porch of a narrow house in Glendale, California, where a woman named Tamar had raised her granddaughter on bread dipped in olive oil and the stubborn, beautiful music of a language the rest of the neighborhood didn't speak. Armenian. Specifically, the informal Western Armenian dialect of the diaspora, not the clipped, formal Eastern Armenian of Yerevan, but the warmer, rougher cousin, full of contractions and borrowed words and sayings that didn't translate cleanly into anything else. Senna understood every word. The money was moved before the Rotterdam ship cleared the harbor, 3 million. Vartan confirmed the containers were logged clean. A second voice, lower, cautious. Then why is it still missing? And Lev's voice again, very quiet. Because someone on this floor took it. And when I find out who, I'm going to make an example. Senna did not move. She stared at the Rotterdam log in front of her and did not move for 6 full minutes. And then her desk phone rang. It was her supervising partner at the firm, Howard, who had hired her for exactly this engagement and who had the interpersonal skills of a parking meter, was calling to ask why she had flagged a Rotterdam container invoice as potentially fraudulent without first consulting him. "Because it is fraudulent," Senna said, keeping her voice low and even. "The manifest date and the port clearance timestamp are 11 days apart. That's not a clerical error, Howard, that's a—" Howard interrupted. He used the word overstepping. He used the phrase, "This isn't your call to make." He reminded her that she was a contract hire, not a senior partner, and that her job was to find the $40,000 discrepancy she'd been retained to find, and absolutely nothing else. Senna closed her eyes. She thought of Tamar. She thought of the specific look her grandmother had reserved for incompetent men in positions of authority, a look that could strip paint at 50 feet. She thought of the phrase Tamar had taught her for exactly this kind of situation, the one she'd muttered every time the landlord tried to shortchange her. Gisha muhchi hitni arajinuchin. A fool never finds the morning, no matter how long he stays awake. She said it out loud in Armenian, low but not low enough. The conference room went silent. Not quiet, silent. The particular silence of a room full of dangerous men who have just heard something they did not expect. Senna realized what she'd done approximately 1 second after she said it. She looked up from her desk. Through the gap where the frosted glass ended and the clear transom began, Lev Kazarian was looking directly at her. His dark eyes were very still, very focused, and alive in a way that sent a cold, sharp current straight down the center of her chest. She looked back at her monitor. She said, very quietly, "I'll call you later, Howard," and hung up. 40 seconds later, the conference room door opened. Orin came out first. He was Lev's head of security, a broad, quiet man, with the face of someone who had seen too much and reacted to none of it. He walked to Senna's workstation with the unhurried purpose of a man who had done this before. "Mr. Kazarian would like a word." It was not a question. Senna saved her work, because she was nothing if not methodical, picked up her legal pad and her pen, and followed Orin into the conference room. The other men were gone. Lev was standing at the window wall, looking out at the grey afternoon skyline. He didn't turn around when she came in. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. "Sit down, Ms. Dupree." She sat. She put her legal pad on the table in front of her, and her hands flat on top of it, and she breathed, slow and even, the way she breathed before presenting a fraud finding to a board of directors who didn't want to hear it. Lev turned around. He studied her for a long moment with those dark, still eyes. Then, in Armenian, the same informal diaspora dialect, warm and rough, and exactly the way Tamar had spoken it, he said, "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Senna looked at him steadily. She answered in kind, "My grandmother, she was from Beirut. Her parents were from Yerevan before that." Something shifted in Lev's expression. It wasn't warmth exactly. It was recalibration. The look of a man who had made an assumption and was now doing the arithmetic on exactly how wrong he had been. He sat down across from her. He folded his hands on the table. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm giving you right now." Senna held his gaze. Her heart was hammering. Her palms were steady. "Because the more specific I am, the more of a liability I become, and I don't think either of us wants that." Silence. The Manhattan skyline blinked grey and silver behind him. "You're remarkably calm," Lev said. "I'm terrified," Senna said, "but I'm also right, and being right helps." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a man who had just been genuinely surprised for the first time in a long while and was deciding whether to be annoyed or intrigued. "What are you right about?" Senna put her hand on her legal pad. She had been filling it for 5 days. "The $40,000 discrepancy you hired my firm to find? It's not 40,000, it's 3.2 million. Distributed across 18 months in increments small enough to pass automated review. Rotterdam wasn't the only port. There's also Piraeus and Felixstowe. She slid the top sheet toward him. The missing 3 million you were just discussing, it wasn't stolen by whoever you think it was. The transfer route runs through a shell company registered in Delaware, and the signatory on the account is your own head of logistics. Lev did not look at the paper. He looked at her. Vartan, he said. It was barely a word. It was the sound of a man understanding something he had been unwilling to see. I don't know his name, Senna said carefully. I know a signature and a pattern. You know the name. Another silence. This one was heavier. Lev reached out and picked up the sheet of paper. He read it once, then again. The stillness of his face became something else entirely, controlled, deliberate, the way a person controls a very large and very dangerous thing by not letting it move. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you would have found it eventually, Senna said, and I'd rather you know I helped you find it than wonder if I was in on it. She paused. Also, I'd like to leave the building tonight. Lev looked up from the paper. That, he said slowly, may be more complicated than you realize. She didn't leave, not that night. Orin explained it to her with the low-key apology of a man who clearly didn't enjoy this part of his job. A vehicle belonging to a rival organization had been spotted outside the building that afternoon. Senna had been seen entering on day 1. She had been at this floor every day since. In the logic of the world she had accidentally stepped into, a woman who spent 6 days inside Kazarian Holdings was not a neutral party. I'm a forensic accountant, Senna said flatly. I know, Orin said they don't. She was given a private office with a working laptop, a door she could lock from the inside, and a standing order from Lev that she was not to be disturbed. Dinner arrived at 8. Actual food, not the deli cart on 41, and Senna ate it at the desk while she cross-referenced Delaware corporate registrations with the shipping invoices she'd copied before handing over the originals. She wasn't doing it for Lev, she was doing it for herself. In her experience, the more clearly she understood a problem, the more options she had for solving it. She intended to have as many options as possible before morning. At 11:43, she found it. The shell company had a secondary signatory, a dormant name added 18 months ago that linked to a holding entity with 2 other clients. One of those clients was a legal firm. The legal firm had in its publicly filed partnership documentation a recognizable name on the advisory board, a name that connected, with 3 careful steps, to the rival organization Lev was already at war with. Except it wasn't the rival who'd set this up. The rival was the intended target. Someone had used Vartan to manufacture evidence of theft that pointed toward them, planning to let Lev move first, weaken both sides, and step into the vacuum. Senna stared at her screen for a long time. Then she picked up the desk phone and asked Orin to get Lev. He came in 20 minutes later, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, with the look of a man who had been doing something difficult and unpleasant, and had set it aside to be here. His eyes, when he looked at her, were carrying something complex and dark. You found something else. I found all of it, Senna said. She walked him through it, the way she walked boards through audit findings. Clear, precise, no editorializing. She showed him the corporate chain. She showed him the secondary signatory. She showed him the third-party legal firm and the name in the advisory board section and what it meant about who actually wanted this war and why. Lev stood very still through all of it. When she finished, the silence was long and specific. This wasn't a theft, he said finally. It was a setup. Someone wanted you to go to war, Senna said, and they needed an inside man to make it credible. Vartan gave them access to the accounts. The missing 3 million was the tripwire. She hesitated. I think they were counting on you moving fast, before you confirmed the source. I would have, Lev said quietly. I know. He looked at her. How do you know? Because you're careful, but you're also angry, Senna said. And angry, careful men move fast when they think they've been betrayed by someone close to them. The corner of his mouth pulled. This time it made it all the way, brief, reluctant like sunlight through clouded cover. "You've been watching me." "I'm a forensic accountant. I watch everyone." At 12:30 in the morning, Oren appeared in the doorway. The vehicle from earlier hadn't left. There were now two of them, and someone had made a call from inside the building, traced to a burner registered to a man whose name Senna now recognized as one of Vartan's known associates. "He knows we found him," Lev said. "Or someone told him you were about to," Oren said. Senna was already looking at the floor plan on her laptop. She had pulled it from the building's publicly filed fire safety compliance documents on day 2, out of habit. She had a thing about knowing her exits. "The freight elevator on the north side," she said. "It opens to the loading dock on 38, which connects to the parking structure that exits onto 51st, not 52nd. If they're watching the main entrance and the 52nd side, they won't be covering that one. Not yet." She turned the laptop so they could see. "The fire door alarm on that corridor runs on a 12-second delay from the panel. I noticed it when I was reviewing the building systems report for the compliance section of the audit. If someone pulls the alarm on 41, not this floor, 41, it triggers a full floor sweep before escalating to building-wide. That gives you a window. Everyone moves toward the stairwells. The freight corridor stays clear." Both men looked at her. "I can pull the alarm," she added. Oren looked at Lev. Lev was looking at Senna with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the careful assessment of the first conversation or the cold calculation of the evidence review. Something simpler and more unguarded than either. Something that looked, improbably, like wonder. "Do it," Lev said. Senna stood up, picked up her laptop bag, and went to pull the alarm on 41. It worked. It worked with the clean, satisfying precision of a correctly formatted spreadsheet, and Senna would spend a considerable amount of time later refusing to admit how much she had enjoyed watching it unfold. They made it to the loading dock. Oren made a call. A car arrived. By 1:15 in the morning, they were in a private townhouse in the West Village with good locks and a kitchen, better stocked than anything Senna owned. She sat at the island with her laptop open and a cup of tea going cold beside her while Oren coordinated with the rest of the security team. From the next room, she could hear the low, controlled sound of Lev on the phone. She didn't try to listen. She was tired and wrung out, and the adrenaline had fully metabolized, leaving behind the specific exhaustion of a person who has been operating at maximum capacity for 7 straight hours. She was staring at the Rotterdam manifest when Lev came into the kitchen. He poured himself 2 fingers of something amber without looking at her. Then he set a second glass in front of her and filled it without asking. She picked it up and drank. "Vartan has been collected," Lev said. He did not elaborate. Senna decided she did not need him to. "The third party has been identified. We won't be going to war." He set his glass down. "Because of you. Because of a Delaware corporate registration database and a badly installed ventilation system," Senna said. Lev looked at her sideways. "You're not going to take the credit." "I found a paper trail. I'm good at that." "You also evacuated 40 floors of a midtown high-rise using a fire code compliance report." That was just logistics. Lev turned to face her fully. She made herself look back at him, at the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the undone collar, the way he was looking at her like she was a problem he had not anticipated and was now not sure he wanted to solve. "I've spent a decade in rooms full of people who were either afraid of me or trying to impress me," he said. "You've done neither." "I've been afraid of you," Senna said honestly. "I've just also been busy." His mouth did the thing again, the slow, reluctant pull. This time it stayed. "Your grandmother," he said. "What was her name?" The question surprised her. "Tamar." Lev was quiet for a moment. Then in the diaspora Armenian that still sounded strange and right coming from him, she raised someone remarkable. Senna felt something happen in her chest. something quiet and unexpected, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a very long time. She looked down at her tea. "She would have found your fraud faster than I did," Senna said. "She had better instincts." "I doubt that." Lev moved around the island, not quickly, not in any way that should have changed the temperature of the room, but it did. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her the way he had looked at the evidence, carefully, thoroughly, like he intended to understand it completely. "I need to ask you something." "Okay." "The audit contract. What you were hired to find, the 40,000. Did you find it?" Senna blinked. Then, despite everything, she almost laughed. "Yes, day 3. It was a data entry error in accounts payable. A vendor invoice keyed with a transposed digit. I've been sitting on the corrected file waiting to submit my final report." Lev stared at her. "You found what you were hired to find on day 3. "And then I kept looking," she said, "because I'm constitutionally incapable of leaving a bad number alone." Something in his expression broke open. Not a dramatic fracture, but the small, precise giving way of a man whose composure had met something it didn't have a category for. He reached out and tucked a loose braid back from her temple, the gesture so unhurried and careful it didn't register as presumptuous until it was already done. His hand rested against the side of her face, warm, entirely still. "You're not going back to that firm," Lev said. "Not after this." "You don't get to tell me where I work." "I'm asking you," he said, "to work for me instead." Senna looked up at him. His eyes in the low kitchen light were dark and direct and entirely serious. "Your books are a disaster," she said. "I know. It would take me 8 months minimum to rebuild the financial architecture from scratch. I know. And I want a real employment contract, benefits, a budget, and you don't get to look over my shoulder." "I wouldn't dare," Lev said. He almost sounded like he meant it. He dropped his hand. He picked up his glass. He looked at the window and the dark city outside it, and said quietly, still in Armenian, "You could have walked away at any point. You had the information. You could have disappeared." Senna considered this. "Not really," she said. "I had identified $3.2 million in active fraud, professionally speaking. Leaving it on the table would have been offensive." Lev turned back to look at her. The reluctant smile returned, and this time it was joined by something warmer, something that hadn't been there an hour ago, that the night had produced out of bad ventilation work and a Delaware database and a woman who could not leave a wrong number alone. "Chelok achchik," he said softly. Smart girl, the way his grandfather had said it, the way Tamar had said it, over a kitchen table that smelled like olive oil and cardamom. Senna looked at him steadily. "I'm not a girl," she said. "I'm the most expensive hire you've ever made, and I want that in writing." Lev laughed. It was a real laugh, low and sudden and surprised out of him, the laugh of a man who had forgotten he was capable of it. It filled the kitchen and settled something in the air that had been braced and sharp all night. "First thing tomorrow," he said, in writing. 6 weeks later, Senna Dupree moved into an office on the 43rd floor of Kazarian Holdings with her name on the door and a mandate so broad it made her old supervisor Howard physically pale when she told him she was resigning. She rebuilt the financial architecture in 7 months, not 8. She identified 2 additional shell entities, renegotiated 6 vendor contracts, and implemented a document authentication protocol that made the kind of fraud Vartan had run essentially impossible going forward. She hired her own team. She had a budget. Lev did not look over her shoulder. He looked at her, though. She had noticed that early, the way he had a habit of finding her in a room, of orienting toward her the way a compass found north, without appearing to try. He brought her coffee the way he rolled up his sleeves before a difficult meeting, like it was simply the rational thing to do. He switched into Armenian without thinking when it was just the 2 of them, and she answered in kind, and neither of them acknowledged that this had become a language they shared the way other people share a shorthand or a joke, or a thing too specific to explain to anyone else. She had spent her entire career making herself small enough to fit into rooms that weren't built for her. She had learned to fold her ambition, her volume, her very body into the smallest possible shape, to take up no more space than necessary, to move through the professional world like someone who understood that she was tolerated rather than welcomed. She had believed for a very long time that invisibility was protection. It had taken a badly installed ventilation system, a $3 million fraud, and her grandmother's proverb to prove her wrong. On a Tuesday in November, she was reviewing the Felixstowe accounts when Lev came into her office, closed the door, and sat down across from her without preamble. "I need to tell you something," he said. Senna put down her pen. He looked at her for a long moment, the same thorough, unhurried look she had first seen across a conference room table, but warmer now, less guarded than she had ever seen it. "I looked forward to coming to work this morning," he said. "I haven't been able to say that in approximately 7 years." Senna considered this. "That's because your financial systems no longer look like abstract expressionist art." "That's not why," Lev said. The office was quiet. Outside, Manhattan continued its relentless business. Senna held his gaze and felt the particular stillness of a moment she recognized, the kind where everything before it had been preamble and something real was about to begin. "I know," she said. She picked up her pen. She looked at Lev Kazarian across her desk, with her name on the door and her team down the hall and 7 months of work that had made this place more honest than it had ever been, and she smiled, and she took up every inch of the space she had always been owed.